When my parents left me their $850,000 ranch, I secretly transferred everything into my own LLC, just to be safe. Last week, my brother walked in with his lawyer, smirking. "The deed is in my name now. Pack your bags." I just leaned back and said, "Good luck with that." 3 days later, he came back with movers and went pale when he saw who was waiting at the gate with the legal papers. I, 34M, never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. My parents died 18 months ago in a car accident. One moment they were driving back from their anniversary dinner. The next moment a drunk driver crossed the median, and that was it. No goodbyes, no final words, just gone. They left behind a beautiful 200-acre ranch in Montana worth about $850,000. The kind of place with rolling hills, a main house that smelled like pine and my mother's cooking, and enough land that you could ride for an hour and still be on your own property. My father built most of it with his own hands over 30 years. Every fence post, every barn beam had his sweat in it. The wool was clear. Everything went to me, not split between me and my older brother. Just me. And I knew exactly why. My brother had been the golden child growing up. Star quarterback, business degree from a good school, married his college sweetheart. But somewhere in his 30s, things shifted. He got into some bad investments, started borrowing money from our parents they never saw again. 5 years before they died, he asked Dad for $50,000 to save his failing consulting business. Dad gave it to him. 6 months later, my brother asked for another $30,000. Dad said no. They didn't speak for 2 years after that. I was different. I stayed local, worked as a ranch hand on neighboring properties, helped Dad maintain our place on weekends. Never asked for a dime. When Dad had his first heart scare 3 years back, I was the one who drove him to every cardiology appointment while my brother was too busy closing deals in Seattle. So when the lawyer read the will and everything came to me, I wasn't shocked. My brother was. He sat there in that office, face getting redder by the second, but he didn't say anything. Just walked out. That should have been my first warning. A week after the funeral, I moved into the ranch full-time. I quit my job and decided to honor what Dad had built. I had some savings and figured I could make it work with small-scale cattle ranching and maybe leasing some land. It wasn't about the money. It was about keeping his legacy alive. But I'm not stupid. I knew my brother. I knew he was already doing the math on what that property was worth. So I did something I never told anyone about. I contacted a lawyer friend from high school who'd gone into estate planning. I asked him about protecting the ranch. He suggested I transfer the property into an LLC with me as the sole member. It would protect me from liability, make things cleaner for taxes, and most importantly, it would make the ownership structure slightly more complicated for anyone trying to contest things. We set it up within 3 months. I transferred the deed from my name into the LLC. Everything looked normal from the outside. I was still living there, still working the land, still paying the property taxes. But legally, the ranch wasn't in my personal name anymore. I didn't tell my brother. Why would I? He'd already made it clear he wanted nothing to do with me after the will reading. He didn't come to Christmas that year. Didn't return my calls on his birthday. Radio silence. Until last week. I was fixing a section of fence on the north pasture when I saw a black Mercedes coming up the long driveway. I didn't recognize the car. As it got closer, I saw my brother in the passenger seat. There was another man driving, older guy in a suit. My stomach dropped. They parked in front of the main house and got out. My brother was wearing what he always wore when he wanted to intimidate people. Expensive suit, Italian shoes. That smirk he'd perfected in high school when he knew he'd won something. I walked over, still holding my fence pliers. My brother didn't even say hello. He just looked at me with this expression of pure satisfaction and told me the deed was in his name now. He said I needed to pack my bags because this was his property. His lawyer stood there nodding, holding a briefcase like it was full of nuclear codes. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. I asked him what he was talking about. He pulled out a document from the lawyer's briefcase and showed me. It was a deed, looked official, with the county seal and everything. It had his name on it as the property owner. My mind raced. Had he forged something? Had he found some loophole in the will? I looked at the lawyer, who introduced himself as someone specializing in property disputes. He explained that they'd discovered an error in the probate process and had it corrected through the county. He made it sound so official, so done. I should have panicked. I should have called my own lawyer right then. But instead, something calm settled over me. Because I knew something they didn't. I looked at my brother and told him good luck with that. That's all I said. Then I turned around and walked back to my fence. I could hear my brother behind me, yelling about how I had 72 hours to vacate, how he was being generous giving me that much time, how he'd already lined up a buyer for the whole property. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking. That night, I called my lawyer friend. I explained what happened and sent him photos of the document they'd shown me. He looked it over and started laughing. He told me what they'd done was pull the original deed from before I'd transferred it to the LLC. They must have found some corrupt county clerk or paid someone off to file a fraudulent deed transfer. It looked real because it was based on real records, just outdated ones. But here's the thing. That deed was worthless. The property hadn't been in my personal name for over a year. Even if they'd somehow legally transferred it from my name to his, which I doubted, they'd transferred something I no longer owned. The LLC owned it, and I was the only member of that LLC. My lawyer told me to let them play it out. He said we'd catch them in the act and then bury them with the evidence. He started preparing paperwork, pulling all the LLC records, getting affidavits ready. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I kept working the ranch like nothing was wrong. Fed the cattle, fixed equipment, rode the property line. But inside, I was watching the clock. On the third day, I saw them coming. Not just my brother's Mercedes this time. He brought a whole convoy. 2 moving trucks, the Mercedes, and another SUV. I counted at least 8 people total. They came rolling up that driveway like they owned the place. Which, in my brother's mind, he did. I was standing by the main gate when they arrived. But I wasn't alone. My lawyer was there. And standing next to him was a sheriff's deputy I'd known since elementary school. And next to the deputy was someone my brother definitely wasn't expecting, a representative from the district attorney's office. I watched my brother's face as he got out of the car and saw them. The color drained right out. That smirk vanished like someone had slapped it off. The DA's representative stepped forward and introduced herself. She told my brother and his lawyer that they were being investigated for filing fraudulent property documents and attempted theft by deception. The deputy handed them both formal notices. My lawyer then pulled out the LLC paperwork, all properly filed and recorded with the county. He showed them the transfer documents from over a year ago. He explained very clearly that even if their fraudulent deed had been real, it was transferring property that didn't belong to me anymore. They'd essentially filed papers saying they were transferring ownership of something that wasn't mine to transfer. My brother's lawyer tried to argue. He claimed they'd done everything legally through proper county channels. But my lawyer cut him off and showed him the affidavit from the actual county clerk, the real one, who confirmed that someone had submitted falsified documents using stolen credentials. The DA's representative told them they had 2 options: cooperate with the investigation and possibly avoid criminal charges, or lawyer up and fight it. She made it very clear that filing false property documents was a felony in Montana. My brother just stood there, frozen. All those movers he'd hired were standing around looking confused, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. I finally spoke up. I told my brother he had about 5 minutes to get everyone off my property before I added trespassing to the list of problems he was facing. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Fear. Real fear. Not the cocky older brother who always got what he wanted. Just a scared man who'd made a massive mistake. His lawyer was already on his phone, probably calling someone more expensive. The movers were loading back into their trucks. The whole convoy turned around and left in a cloud of dust. The deputy took statements from everyone. The DA's representative told me they'd be in touch and that I'd done the right thing by documenting everything. My lawyer just grinned and told me this was the most fun he'd had in years. After they all left, I walked back to the main house and sat on the porch where Dad used to sit every evening. The sun was setting over the west pasture, painting everything gold and orange. I thought about him and Mom, about how they'd worked so hard to build something that would last. And I realized why Dad had left it all to me. It wasn't about favoritism. It wasn't about punishment. It was because he knew I'd protect it. He knew I'd see it as more than just dollar signs and property value. He knew I'd fight for it. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since the incident at the gate. I figured I should update everyone because things have moved faster than I expected. My brother's lawyer dropped him immediately. Turns out filing fraudulent property documents isn't something reputable attorneys want their name attached to. My brother hired some criminal defense guy out of Billings who specializes in white-collar cases. The county investigation found exactly what we suspected. My brother had paid a former county clerk's assistant $15,000 to file the false deed transfer. The assistant had kept access credentials after being fired 6 months earlier for unrelated issues. They traced the payment through my brother's business account. He'd literally written a check for consulting services to this guy. The DA offered my brother a deal: plead guilty to attempted fraud, pay restitution for all legal fees I'd incurred, perform community service, and accept 5 years probation. If he fought it, they'd push for jail time. He took the deal, had his fancy new lawyer call mine to arrange the restitution payment. $28,000 to cover my legal costs, the investigation fees, everything. The check cleared last week. But here's the part that honestly surprised me. 3 days after he took the plea deal, my brother showed up at the ranch alone. No lawyer, no moving trucks, just him in a rental car. I was working in the barn when I heard the engine. My first instinct was to call the deputy, but something made me wait. He got out of the car slowly, hands visible, like he was approaching a spooked horse. He asked if we could talk. I told him he had 5 minutes. We sat on the porch, same place I'd been sitting after the convoy left. He looked different, older somehow, tired. He told me he was sorry. Not the half-hearted sorry people give when they're caught, but something that sounded real. He said he'd spent the last 15 years making bad decisions, trying to prove he was smarter than everyone else, and he'd lost sight of what actually mattered. He told me about his marriage falling apart. His wife had left him 6 months ago, took their daughter to her parents' place in Colorado. He'd leveraged their house to pay for that fraudulent deed scheme, and now he was facing foreclosure. His consulting business was dead. He had nothing. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel vindicated either. I just felt tired. He asked if I remembered the summer he taught me to ride a bike. I was 6, he was 12. He ran beside me for hours in the driveway until I got it. He said he'd been thinking about that a lot, about when he used to actually be a decent brother. I told him that was a long time ago. He nodded and said he knew. Then he asked if there was any way, someday, he could make things right. Not with the ranch. He didn't want anything from me. But with us, with being family again. I didn't answer right away. I looked out at the land, at everything Dad had built, and thought about what he would have wanted. Dad was a hard man, but he believed in second chances. He'd given my brother dozens of them, even when it cost him. I told my brother I didn't know. I told him trust isn't something you rebuild in one conversation on a porch. But I also told him that if he actually put in the work, actually became someone different, maybe we could talk again in a year or 2. He accepted that. He stood up, shook my hand, and left. I watched his rental car disappear down the driveway and wondered if I'd made the right call. Update 2. It's been 4 months since that conversation on the porch. I'm writing this because something happened yesterday that I think closes this chapter properly. I got a letter in the mail from my brother. Not an email, not a text, an actual handwritten letter. That alone was strange enough to make me open it. He wrote to tell me he'd sold his condo in Seattle, paid off his debts, and moved to Colorado to be near his daughter. He got a job as a financial advisor at a small firm, nothing fancy, and he'd been going to therapy twice a week. He said his ex-wife was willing to let him see their daughter on weekends as long as he stayed clean and proved he was stable. He thanked me for not pressing additional charges, for accepting the plea deal, for giving him any chance at all. He said he understood if I never wanted to see him again, but he wanted me to know he was trying to be better. There was something else in the envelope. A check for $50,000, made out to me. The memo line said, Dad's loan, with interest. I stared at that check for a long time. It was the money he'd borrowed from our parents 5 years ago, the money that had caused the rift between him and Dad. He'd actually paid it back. I called him. First time we'd spoken since the porch conversation. He sounded surprised to hear from me. I asked him about the check. He told me he'd been saving every extra dollar since he took the new job, sold everything valuable he still owned, and scraped together enough to repay what he owed. He said it felt important, like something he had to do before he could move forward. We talked for almost an hour. Really talked, not just the surface-level stuff. He told me about his daughter, about how she'd asked him why he'd been so angry all the time before. He told me about therapy, about unpacking all the resentment he'd been carrying since we were kids. He said he'd always felt like he had to be perfect because he was the oldest, and when he couldn't maintain that, he'd spiraled. I told him about the ranch, about some improvements I'd been making, about how I'd started offering writing lessons to local kids on weekends. I told him it felt good to share what Dad had built instead of just sitting on it. Before we hung up, he asked if maybe, next time he was in Montana visiting our parents' graves, he could stop by the ranch. Not to stay, just to see it again. To see what I'd done with it. I told him yes. I deposited that check yesterday. I'm using it to build a new barn, something Dad always wanted but never got around to. I'm going to put a plaque on it with his name and the dates he lived. It feels right, using that money for something he would have loved. I don't know if my brother and I will ever be close again. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But I think we've both learned something these last few months. He learned that shortcuts and schemes don't work, that you can't buy or steal your way to happiness. And I learned that protecting what you love doesn't mean you can't forgive. The ranch is still here, still standing, still beautiful. The cattle are healthy, the fences are strong, and every evening I sit on that porch and watch the sunset over the west pasture, just like Dad used to. Sometimes I think he'd be proud of how this all turned out. Not just that I kept the ranch, but that I didn't let anger destroy what was left of our family. He built this place with his hands and his heart, and I'm doing my best to honor both. That's where things stand now. The legal mess is over. My brother is rebuilding his life, and I'm here doing what I was meant to do all along. Taking care of the land and keeping Dad's legacy alive. It's not a perfect ending. Real life rarely is. But it's honest, and it's real, and for now, that's enough.